And then there's Bill Gates with his then wife Melinda, who had a Jesuit priest in their family, while their foundation gives millions of dollars a year to Jesuit education programs. The connection with Rome was specifically noted by Dr. Brian Ardis, who gained national attention warning America about the use of the drug remdesivir to treat COVID-19.
I knew right away from the Gilead study, conducted 2 months earlier, that the entire kidney failure, multiple organ failure, was a result of remdesivir and had nothing to do with the virus.
In an online interview, Dr. Ardis gave his opinion on the role of Rome and COVID-19.
But I am concerned that no one is acknowledging who the real threat is. I actually think the Roman Catholic Church and the Pope Francis, is over this entire thing. And I think he's manipulating, controlling the entire narrative. I think he's got Anthony Fauci in his pocket. I think he's got Joe Biden, Donald Trump, Francis Collins. I think all of them are being controlled by a division of the Roman Catholic Church called the Order of the Jesuits, whose sole mission for the last 200 years I'm aware of, since 1857, they have been plotting to destroy the Constitution of the United States.
Dr. Ardis then goes on to warn about the issue of open borders, as promoted by Joe Biden, who is shown here being sworn into office on a copy of the Jesuits' Douay Rheims Bible, a symbol of the Counter-Reformation. Biden himself attends a Jesuit church in Washington, D.C.
Well, what is Joe Biden doing? He opened up the borders, let people flood in. It's exactly what the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church have always wanted. So, and if you don't realize what the religion of Mexico is, who's flooding our borders right now from the south, it is Catholic. In the Catholic doctrines, they have stated that we need to flood America with Catholics.
Illegal immigration is a form of social justice, according to Rome.
There was a document that was published, it was put out by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops in conjunction with the Mexican Conference of Catholic Bishops. And it's called Strangers No Longer Together on a Journey of Hope. And it was basically a position paper of the Roman Catholic Church on facilitating mass illegal immigration into the United States. And it was like, hey, y'all come on up here. That's basically what the Roman Catholic bishops and the Mexican bishops were talking about in this paper. And of course, you're seeing the actual results of that right now.
Former federal police officer Doug Thornton served 10 years with the Department of Homeland Security. Much of his time was spent on the Mexican border. We asked him to comment about the role of the Catholic Church and their involvement in illegal immigration.
You have entities like almost every Catholic church, and to include the Red Cross, that are all sponsored by the Vatican, controlled by the Vatican. They are the main culprits in moving people. It's always been a Catholic church shows up somewhere at midnight with a van when we got, a busload or two of illegals, and then they come and pick them up and they drive them away because they are helping the government with repurposing these people, bringing them to other places. They're bringing these people across the border, and then they're funneling them all over the United States.
While the problems of illegal immigration seem to be of recent origin, most Americans are largely unaware that the plan to invade the United States through Mexico is one that dates back to the American Civil War. In his book on the assassination of Abraham Lincoln, Emmett McLaughlin even warned about the issue in a chapter titled Conspiracy South of the Border. One of the most controversial chapters in all of American history involves the time of the Civil War, the climax of which was the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. While the events surrounding Lincoln's death are well known, it is the truth about the conspirators and what motivated them to commit their crime that some argue has been suppressed in modern times. The American Civil War is said to this day to have been the bloodiest war in American history. Historians have written about the terrible havoc of death, with the shrieks of the wounded and dying, how the soldiers fell in battle as grain falls before a reaper. Men on both sides were subjected to murderous fire, so much so it appeared to some that only mutual extermination would put a stop to the awful carnage. Such are the descriptions of historians, both past and present. Most historians estimate that over 600,000 men perished during the struggle. Many of them fell in battle, while others died of disease and also as prisoners of war. It was a conflict that divided the nation. While we are told that slavery was the key issue, how is it that the war began when Abraham Lincoln had no intention of abolishing the slave trade? The answer may be in the role played by the powers of Rome during the conflict. One of the leading figures of the time was a Catholic priest and personal friend of Abraham Lincoln, a man named Charles Chineke. According to Chineke, the plot to kill Lincoln was instigated by the Jesuit order.
The man who kills Abraham Lincoln will be an immortal.
You start scratching anybody who is connected to the assassination of Lincoln, you're going to find Jesuits. You're going to find people who were Jesuits, people who were related to Jesuits, people who are connected to Jesuits, people under the authority of Jesuits. It's a Jesuit plot.
Chineke wrote that the Jesuit assassin Booth murdered Lincoln the 14th of April, 1865 at 10 o'clock p.m. He went on to say that Booth was nothing but the tool of the Jesuits. It was Rome who directed his arm after corrupting his heart and damning his soul. He said that horrible crime was the work of popery. And after 20 years of constant and most difficult researches, I come fearlessly today before the American people to say and prove that the President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated by the priests and the Jesuits of Rome. The testimony of Chineke was recorded in his book, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, where he detailed his life as a Catholic priest and how he also became the friend of Abraham Lincoln.
In this book, we learn a lot about the Jesuits and a little more about Lincoln himself and about the assassination of Lincoln. Because of Chineke, we have an insight into a lot of background concerning even Lincoln in the days and what the Jesuits were doing in the days of Abraham Lincoln.
Charles Chineke was originally from Canada, where he was ordained a Catholic priest in 1833. During his time in Quebec, he was dedicated to opposing alcohol abuse and became known as the Apostle of Temperance. He would later immigrate to the United States, where he would become the founder of St. Anne, Illinois. The memory of his influence is still preserved in St. Anne to this day. In modern times, his writings, which have inspired much debate, have been defended by a fellow Canadian.
Well, I read Charles Chineke's autobiography, 50 Years in the Church of Rome, way back in 1986. And I was so startled, so intrigued by his stunning allegation of the involvement of a powerful religious organization in the murder of Abraham Lincoln. And I remember looking at this book and thinking, wow, what a thing to say. And wondered who this man, Charles Chineke, was. And so I started to do research.
Canadian author Paul Sarup would spend more than 20 years investigating the story of Charles Chineke, and especially his claims concerning Lincoln and the American Civil War. His research was published in the book, Who Killed Abraham Lincoln?, where he reveals much about the historic character of Chineke himself.
He was an accomplished, celebrated clergyman, born in 1809, the same year as Abraham Lincoln. He gained worldwide fame and influence during his lifetime. When he died, his obituary, for instance, was on the front page of the New York Times, and it was reported around the English-speaking world. He was born in Quebec, a Roman Catholic, but he was raised as such, but uniquely in that he also learned and came to know God's Word, as his father had a French Bible. He then went on to become a Roman Catholic priest, and thanks to his remarkable eloquence, he'd persuaded about half of Quebec to give up drinking. And most Quebec families had a portrait of him in their household.
In his book, Chineke says he first met Lincoln in the year 1856, when he was being falsely accused by a fellow Catholic named Peter Spink. According to Chineke's account, the controversy was stirred up by a powerful bishop named Anthony O'Regan of Chicago. Supposedly, he was angry at Chineke, who had challenged his authority and sought revenge through Peter Spink. The controversy ultimately landed in a court in Urbana, Illinois, where Chineke was defended by Abraham Lincoln, who was a respected lawyer at the time.
There in Urbana, Lincoln defended Chineke in 2 court actions brought by a prominent Catholic resident of the area named Peter Spink. So he defended him in 2 court actions. One of them was the most high-profile libel case in Lincoln's career. And incidentally, as I state in my book, at this point of time, the celebrated Apostle of Temperance fame in 1856, however, was such that the slander suit in which Abraham Lincoln defended him attracted large crowds of people who attended because Chineke was involved, not Lincoln. So interestingly, it was actually Chineke who was better known than Lincoln, though certainly at this time, Lincoln was a distinguished and accomplished lawyer. In the fall of 1856, with Lincoln's help, the case was won, and Chineke said that ultimately the Bishop of Chicago was behind it, and with the bishops of the world really supporting him.
According to Chineke's written account, Lincoln recognized that the Canadian priest had been wrongly persecuted by the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. But the victory against Rome compelled Chineke to give Abraham Lincoln a warning.
Well, at the conclusion of the trial in Urbana in 1856. Chineke said he was crying, and Lincoln said to him, well, why are you crying? I mean, you should be very happy. But Chineke said that he had seen some 10 or 12 Jesuits in the courthouse. Chineke said that he could see Lincoln's sentence of death in their eyes. He says Lincoln became more solemn and said, I know the Jesuits never forget nor forsake, but man must not care how and where he dies, provided he dies at the post of honor and duty.
When I read the words that Chineke wrote about Abraham Lincoln's words, they match what I understand of his speech so well, it's hard not to see. And we said, what reason would he have to lie about it? It cost him so greatly.
Yeah.
It cost him so greatly.
It's a matter of historic record that he was the friend of Lincoln.
Yeah, it's a matter of historical record. But people say his quotes are not real and stuff. Or the Jesuits probably say his quotes are not real. But the truth is, they represent Lincoln so well, and they represent history so well. And again, they cost him greatly to make those statements. So I found only reason to believe that what he said was pretty accurate.
He also knew Lincoln while he was president in the White House.
Yes, he did.
Did he not warn Abraham Lincoln that he was going to be assassinated?
Yes, and Lincoln's response is so famous, I have to say it. I know that the Jesuits never forget nor forsake, but a man must not care how or where he dies, provided he dies at the post of honor and duty. Whoa.
Yeah.
That is amazing that a person would say that that's what matters. He didn't run and hide like a lot of people. He stood right there in the middle of it. People can say anything they want to about Lincoln, about anything else, but from this, dude, this man was a man.
Despite Chineke's initial warning, it would be years before the opposition of Rome would be more fully realized. Once the Civil War began, the Southern Confederacy was linked to the interests of the Vatican and the Catholic bishops of America. The Jesuits were well known as slave owners and took the side of the Confederacy. In fact, Chineke quoted Abraham Lincoln, who said that, "From the beginning of our Civil War, there has been not a secret, but a public alliance between the Pope of Rome and Jeff Davis. The Pope and his Jesuits have advised, supported, and directed Jeff Davis on the land from the first gunshot at Fort Sumter by the rabid Roman Catholic Beauregard." Indeed, General Pierre G.T. Beauregard was just one of many Catholic leaders involved on the Confederate side of the war. Meanwhile, Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederate States, was an Episcopalian but had been educated at a Dominican's boys' school in Springfield, Kentucky. From an early age, he was sympathetic to Roman Catholics. One of his closest advisors was a Catholic priest named Father John Bannon, who would later become a Jesuit. He was enlisted by Davis to lead a diplomatic mission on behalf of the Confederacy to gain official recognition from the Pope. But according to Lincoln, the person who convinced the Vatican to support the Southern cause was Bishop John Hughes, the Archbishop of New York. While pretending to support the Union, Bishop Hughes went to Rome and advised the Pope to recognize the legitimacy of the Southern Republic.
The only nation in the world that recognized the Southern Confederacy with its cornerstone of slavery was the Vatican. Chineke said this was shown by the 1863 letter of Pope Pius IX to Jefferson Davis, whom the Pope addressed as the President of the Confederate States of America. Chineke reported that he visited Lincoln 3 times in the White House, and he and the president talked about this letter, and Lincoln agreed that it was a recognition of the Southern Confederacy by the papacy. The New York Times also indicated its agreement with Chineke in an 1876 article with the title, How the Pope Recognized the Southern Confederacy, his letter to Jeff Davis.
The role of Catholic Confederates during the war has been a topic of surprise to a modern audience, but was well known to those involved in the conflict at the time. According to Chineke, Abraham Lincoln said, "I feel more and more every day that it is not against the Americans of the South alone I am fighting. It is more against the Pope of Rome, his perfidious Jesuits, and their blind and bloodthirsty slaves, than against the real American Protestants that we have to defend ourselves." Yet Chineke was not the only witness from that era who recognized the role of the Vatican in both the war and the killing of Lincoln. Thomas Maley Harris, who was both a medical doctor and Major General in the Union Army, also published a book titled Rome's Responsibility for the Assassination of Abraham Lincoln. General Harris served as the commander for the 10th West Virginia Volunteers during the Civil War. Afterwards, he was one of the military commanders who was appointed to the committee to investigate the assassination of Lincoln, and also to try the conspirators for the crime. As such, General Harris had virtually all of the first-hand information about the plot to kill Lincoln in the months that followed the event. General Harris documented evidence that the key conspirators, including Mary Surratt, whose boarding house provided the location for planning the crime, along with her son, John Surratt, a former Confederate spy during the war, were both devout Roman Catholics, motivated by their loyalty to the Confederacy, and were referred to by Harris as, quote, zealous slaves of the Pope, and clearly proven by the evidence given before the commission to have been leading and active members of the conspiracy. He also mentions the most notorious of them, John Wilkes Booth. He writes that Booth, the ringleader, was born and reared a Protestant. He was only a nominal Protestant, however. Under the influence of his associations in the conspiracy plot, he had become a pervert to Catholicism. It was found that he was wearing a Catholic medal under his vest and over his heart. The wily Jesuit had been able to pervert him to Catholicism and to deceive him into the belief that his medal would conduce to his personal safety and to the success of the enterprise. Charles Chineke argued that Booth had been thoroughly indoctrinated by Jesuit philosophy, which teaches that any leader who refused to obey the Pope was denounced as a tyrant and could be killed. This appears to be the reason why Booth shouted, "Sic semper tyrannis," thus always to tyrants, after he leaped to the stage in Ford's Theater. Jacob Thompson of Mississippi was the former Secretary of the Interior, who resigned his office to serve in the Confederacy. He is remembered as a Confederate secret agent in Canada. About him, General Harris tells us that Thompson used the Jesuitical argument that to kill a tyrant was no murder, and so, assuming that President Lincoln was a tyrant, it would be a glorious and praiseworthy act to take him off. Mary Surratt was captured and ultimately condemned for her part in the conspiracy. After her trial, she was hanged along with the other conspirators. But her son, John Surratt, escaped on the night of the assassination and was smuggled with the help of Catholic priests through Canada and out of the country. his image was shown on some of the original wanted posters next to John Wilkes' spoof. But Surratt was discovered sometime later, we are told at the door of Rome, enrolled under the banners of the Pope in the 9th Company of his Zouaves, under the false name of Watson. This historic image shows John Surratt dressed in the uniform of a papal Zouave, a member of the Pope's army dedicated to defending the Papal States. Despite his initial escape, once Surratt was discovered, he was arrested and brought back to America to stand trial for the murder of Abraham Lincoln. But historians tell us that the jury was compromised, and in spite of overwhelming evidence, a conviction could not be obtained.
In the end, charged with murder and conspiring to murder the president, despite the preponderance of evidence showing his guilt, the jury couldn't agree on a verdict. And Charles Chineke alleged the reason John Surratt was not convicted was because the Catholics on the jury refused to find him guilty, despite the evidence, just as years earlier, a Catholic member of a jury refused to acquit Chineke in his court battle with Peter Spink. Academic Kate Clifford Larson commented in her book, The Assassin's Accomplice, Mary Surratt and the Plot to Kill Abraham Lincoln, saying, much more evidence was introduced shedding light on the extensiveness of the conspiracy as well as new details about Mary's complicity in it. But despite the new evidence, John's case ended in a mistrial. The civilian jury was packed with Southern sympathizers. All charges were then dropped because the statute of limitations of 2 years on a charge of treason had passed, and in February 1868, John was set free. And after that, he taught for several years at a Catholic school in Maryland. He died in 1916. And when he died, a solemn high requiem mass was offered at St. Pius Catholic Church in Baltimore. And this was an unusual honor for a man who was charged and never found innocent of conspiring to murder America's greatest president, and one whose own lawyer stated he was guilty of at least conspiring to be part of a plan to kidnap the president. This mass would be reserved for the funerals of bishops, priests, and nuns. When offered at the funeral of a layman, it would be a token of appreciation for exceptional devotion or service to the church. And it remains a question today, what could that service have been?
Yet according to General Thomas Maley Harris, the killing of Lincoln was only part of Rome's plan against America. The Jesuits and Catholic hierarchy worked with the powers of Europe in an attempt to provide aid to the Southern Confederates through a French army that would invade Mexico and take control of the country, in order to establish what General Harris called a Roman Catholic Empire in Mexico, with their own monarch, an Austrian prince named Maximilian I. The European plot was said to be the work of Pope Pius IX in Rome, along with the Emperor Napoleon III of France. Charles Chineke made the same argument in his later work titled 40 Years in the Church of Christ. He said, during the Civil War, the French Emperor Napoleon and the Pope conceived the idea that there was a good opportunity to establish an empire in Mexico. The expectation was that such an empire would be a great Roman power in this continent and be likely to become part of the slave and Romish nation to be founded on the ruins of the Republic of the United States and the ultimate control of North America. did Abraham Lincoln blame Rome for the American Civil War?
Yes, he did. Chineke visited Lincoln 3 times. He visited his friend 3 times in the White House, and they talked about things like the Civil War. And I can quote Chineke saying what he said Lincoln said. And Lincoln said, "This war would have never been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuit. We owe it to popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of her noblest sons." Though there were great differences between the South and the North on the question of slavery, neither Jeff Davis nor any one of the leading men of the Confederacy would have dared to attack the North had they not relied on the promises of the Jesuits that under the mask of democracy, the money and the arms of the Roman Catholics, even the arms of France, were at their disposal if they would attack us.
Modern historians often overlook that a French army did invade Mexico in 1862 during the American Civil War. The French attempted to take control of the country, but were stopped short at the historic Battle of Puebla on May the 5th, where the Mexican army defeated the French and halted their advance. The Battle of Puebla is celebrated every year during Cinco de Mayo. Yet in time, the French would succeed in capturing Mexico and installed their European monarch, Maximilian I, as the ruler. But his reign was short-lived, as the United States sent aid to help the Mexican fighters defeat the French. Ultimately, Maximilian was deposed and executed by a Mexican firing squad. Yet because of all the intrigues with Rome and the evidence that the Jesuits were behind the assassination of Lincoln, the United States cut off diplomatic relations with the Vatican in the year 1867, a decision that stood for 117 years until the Reagan administration in 1984.